Hi, class. This is our last module, Module 12, and I'm pretty excited about that. And I know you are too. I don't delude myself to think that you are going to miss these lectures, but I have enjoyed giving them to you. I would rather give them to you in person because, well, I'm just putting on makeup to sit in front of myself in an empty room. Therefore, the chair here. At any rate, I'm glad to be on the last module, and I hope you are too. And I'm going to get started without further ado. I know you feel like, and I need to say that every time. It's so important. It just helps to get us started. All right. And we're going to get right into Module 12, linking theory, evidence, and practice. So this kind of pulls it all together. Okay, let's see. Our Module 12 objectives are to explain evidence-based practice and be able to provide rationale for the standard. Why do we have this standard? Compare and contrast various standards of evidence. What are the different kinds or types of evidence? We're going to cover those two today. And next time on the next video, we'll discuss the ideal relationship between theory, evidence, and practice and the barriers to implementing this relationship in addiction work, because we don't always get to the practice part. Okay, well, objective number one, explain evidence-based practice and be able to provide a rationale for the standard. Okay, well, evidence-based practice was a term that came up in the 1990s. And the idea was that all these people were doing addiction treatments, and the treatments varied quite widely. And the question was, are these effective? Which ones are effective? Which ones are not? And how can you, as a consumer, going out to seek addiction treatment for yourself or as for a family member, even know what to choose, right? Without studying the scientific literature yourself. So the issue was, can you force this sort of evidence into practice? So we're using only those treatments that really work. And I can tell you that now is the standard. But that doesn't mean everybody's doing it. But the standard is that providers of treatment should be using evidence-based practices. There should be rigorous research studies that show that this stuff is effective. And that's true for addiction prevention programs. We saw how, people are using programs that are totally ineffective, like the whole history of DARE and all that, but also for treatment programs. Okay. So the evidence-based practice movement basically argued that it's just not enough to use treatments that you've always used. And a provider, even who's using quite an ineffective treatment, it's not like they've decided on this ineffective treatment because they know it doesn't work. It feels like the treatment should work, and in fact, the providers will see the treatment working because the clients are getting better. But what we don't know is the clients who have left treatment, what happened to them? Were they not getting better and that's why they left? Or we don't know if the clients, even who are getting better, would have gotten better anyway. The other thing is that people in recovery report that the treatment was helpful. But again, that doesn't necessarily mean that the treatment works, because the people who are in recovery are doing all kinds of different things in their lives that may be causing the change or the recovery. Okay, so I'm just going to give you an example here of why we can't really trust anything but scientific evidence or practices that have evidence behind them. So let's say that program X is effective. 80% of people who do program X get off of drugs. And that sounds pretty good. And you're going to be like, whoa, because that's the way you're advertised to all the time, right? It's like, 50% of people who take this pill do better or whatever. But we can't be sure that that works because we don't know how many people who would have stopped doing drugs without the program. And if you're guessing we don't have a control group, you're absolutely right. You guessed it. We don't have a control group. And that's another way of saying the same thing. Okay, let's hit objective 2, compare and contrast various standards of evidence. Okay, so first off, what is evidence? Evidence is positive outcome data. And that is examples of outcomes that are related to addiction. So, for example, self-report outcomes of how much you use a substance, other people's reports of how of a person's behavior, has it gotten better? What about biological evidence? We can use things like, urine analysis or medical withdrawal complications to see if the person is using drugs, how much they're using drugs. Court, criminal justice records, how many arrests have there been? Medical records also, like deaths, opioid-related deaths and things like that. Also, you may be looking for other kinds of outcomes besides substance use, like the costs involved in administering a program. But at any rate, the idea here is evidence is data collected on outcomes. Okay, so one of the issues behind evidence-based treatments is there's good quality evidence, and then there's poor quality evidence. So there's a lot of people who are out there saying that they have evidence-based treatments, but they might have really low quality evidence. So unfortunately, just someone saying that they have an evidence-based treatment doesn't necessarily mean that the treatment really works. And so that word has been thrown around quite a bit in the field of addiction studies, without having much meaning. So we've got to scrutinize it a little bit further. So we can ask, what type of evidence is sufficient? If somebody says, well, program X, 80% of my clients stopped using, well, how'd you measure that, right? Or something like that. How do we evaluate the quality of it? Is self-report a good enough measure that they said they stopped using? What about biological indicators like using urine analysis? Well, that's probably a little bit better. It's probably a little more accurate because, let's face it, people lie. How long do we need to follow up on behaviors after a treatment? So if you say, well, they completed my program and the day that the program ended, they weren't using, well, what about 1 week later? What about 6 months later? What about a year later? How many of them are still not using? What does it mean to say that something was effective? That's the thing. So when you hear this evidence-based, you've got to ask, what's the quality of the evidence? So I want to get into that issue, which is different quality of evidence. Okay, so we have a couple of different types of data, and those are called quantitative versus qualitative. And so I want to talk a little bit about those first. Quantitative is numerical data. It uses statistics. It uses typically very large sample sizes, lots of participants, whereas qualitative data will use verbal data, transcripts of what people say, and they'll typically give people open-ended questions and then have them, to say their opinions or their feelings or their thoughts. They typically have small sample sizes, so you might see, in a qualitative study, 5, 15, 20 people, whereas in a quantitative study, a lot of times you'll see thousands of people. Okay, let's look at some of the results here. So in a quantitative study, you might say 20% of survey respondents bought ice cream today. And then in the qualitative study, it would be something like, I bought the ice cream because I saw it when it was in the checkout line and I wanted to treat myself, right? And it might be 5 people who are asked, why did they buy the ice cream? And then the researcher kind of puts together themes of why people buy things. Let me just give you one more example. On average, respondents rate their grocery store a 3 out of 5, a 3.5 out of 5. Well, they measured a whole bunch of respondents. They've had them rated on a 5-point scale. They circle a number of rating the grocery store. And then the difference is you take a bunch of people together, maybe a group of 5, 6, 7 people in a focus group in the qualitative study. And the one person says the grocery store has good options in general, but the lines can be long and they're often out of stock of my favorite brands. So, you get some good information, but it's a little bit different from quantitative studies. And when it comes to treatment outcomes, we definitely want to have that quantitative evidence in addition to qualitative, but quantitative is a little bit better evidence because we're using a lot more people and we're measuring numerically to see to what extent something works. Okay. Not just whether people think it works, but whether it actually works. Okay, so so I want to talk about health data on a continuum, because all health data has these issues, not just addiction related stuff. So at the low quality level, we have testimonials, and that's people just saying, this worked for me, it was amazing. And I know you see that all the time, celebrities saying, well, this worked for me, this is really what got me off drugs. Personal stories, marketing data from treatment centers and stuff like that. That is generally considered to be very low quality. Yeah, I guess it's evidence, or you could call it that, but not very good evidence. Okay, so in the middle somewhere is program evaluations, and we're going to talk a little bit more about these. These are taking place in treatment centers, and typically what they do is they'll start a treatment, but before they start the treatment, they'll look at what was going on with clients before that, and then they look at what was going on with clients after that, and that kind of study is called a program evaluation. They're evaluating the program in the treatment center. That's great, but it's not very well controlled, because again, you don't have a control group. Isolated research studies, a single research study doesn't tell us a whole lot, I mean, so we want a lot of research studies that are sort of finding the same thing. And then what I was saying before, which is qualitative studies, they're going to be decent evidence. It's better than testimonial, because you have multiple people, right, as opposed to one person, but still not of great high quality. On the high quality side are the objective measures, and those are that don't rely on opinion. So those are the quantitative methods, as I was talking about in the last slide, in particular randomized control trials. And I'll talk about that. I've talked about it before in this class, but we're going to go over it again. And then systematic reviews of the quantitative literature. So reviews that bring together a whole bunch of different studies, because again, relying on one study, not great. Okay. So the best scientific evidence, the best objective evidence that a treatment works, the most reliable evidence, is going to be the randomized control trial. And so I just want to go over this once again, because I know it's been a little bit of time. So we take a bunch of patients together, and hopefully that, I know it looks like, you can just imagine every single one of these little people represents, let's say, 100 people or 1,000 people, okay? Because we don't actually just have 10 patients. Okay, anyway, we got these patients, and we are going to then randomly assign them to a treatment group and a control group. Now, why random assignment? You remember why. It's to make these groups equal, so that we don't get heavy users in one group and lesser users in another group, or we don't get all the Democrats in one group, all the Republicans in another group. We don't get all people that live in Cincinnati in one group and all people that live in another town in another group. So we want these groups to be equal. We want them to be equal in age, equal in gender, equal in everything. And the only way to get that is to flip a coin, random assignment. You don't know which group you're going into. You don't get to decide. The researcher doesn't get to decide. It is decided randomly. Then we give them that treatment, and then we follow up. And if, in fact, the treatment group does better than the control group, and we know everything else about these groups is exactly the same, except one got the treatment, one didn't, then we can be pretty dang sure that this treatment works. Okay, now you say, what is better than that? What's better than that is a systematic literature review that goes through a whole bunch of randomized control trials that says, this one found that the treatment worked, and this one found the treatment worked, and this one found that the treatment worked, and this one found the treatment worked. So now you got 10 RCTs that say that the treatment works. Heck yeah, that's some good evidence. Okay, so quantitative levels of evidence. So you say, well, okay, among, we know, we talk about the top here, 1A and 1B. And that is the randomized control trial in 1B, and then the series of randomized control trials. But there's a lot of quantitative evidence under that. So number 4 is not, I don't want you to think that's quantitative evidence. Expert opinion, not quantitative evidence. Okay, we do not. That is not considered quantitative evidence. That is more like the testimony. Okay, but let's look at number 3. well-designed non-experimental descriptive studies. So this is the idea that the more the treatment is used, the less the substance abuse. So if we take one group of people and we look at how much, let's say how many sessions of treatment that they went to, right? And then the amount that they're using. And we find that the more sessions of treatment they go to, the less that they use. That is a negative correlation. And that's evidence, but it's not great evidence, okay? Because it may be that a certain type of person is going to treatment more and the treatment is not causing them to reduce use. It's that this personality factor or some other factor, okay? Because we are not randomly assigning to groups. Okay, I talked a little bit before about program evaluation. The next one is a well-designed quasi-experimental study, and that would be like, for example, with a program evaluation where you're going to implement a program, so you measure prior to the program being implemented, and then you measure after the program is implemented. And we would like to see substance abuse is higher before the program, and now it's lower after the program. Decent evidence, but it ain't a randomized controlled trial, if you know what I mean. Second, okay, up the line, let's do a controlled study, but no randomization. So we've got a clinic in which one group is using a treatment and another group is using another treatment, maybe because one group chose this treatment, the other group chose to do another treatment, or certain therapists will choose this treatment, other therapists choose, and we can compare those two groups. But the difference there is that they are not randomly assigned to groups. So a person that would choose treatment A might be different than a person that would choose treatment B. Those groups are not equivalent to begin with. So it's good evidence, don't get me wrong. But again, it ain't a randomized controlled trial. So let's move on. 2 randomly assigned groups. One gets a treatment, one gets a placebo. Now that's a randomized controlled trial. That is good evidence. Even better than that, we get up to 1A, this series of randomized controlled trials in a systematic review. It don't get any better than that. All right, we're going to do objective 3 next time. You guys have a great day. Next time is going to be my last